Thank you, everyone. Hope everyone had a good lunch. For our next segment, we're going to have a discussion with Dr. Jack Groppel in regards to the opportunity to listen and him share his spirited conversations with Dennis and how Dennis had challenged him over the years. Dr. Groppel is a world-renowned expert in human performance, applying sports science to business and wellness as well. He was a co-founder of the Johnson & Johnson Human Performance Institute and a mainstay of the USTA National Sports Science Committee. His recent memoir, Mountains Within, A Life of Achievement, Quest for Meaning, and a Mountain That Changed Everything, is a fascinating read. At the end of the discussion, he'll be handing out 5 signed copies to 5 lucky attendees. Dr. Groppel. Yes. And returning for our moderators, we have Kyle LaCroix. And an additional co-moderator, we have Jessica Bamman. She's the founder of Dream Court, and she's dedicated her life to serving intellectually and physically challenged athletes. Jessica's goal is to create opportunities and communities for people with special needs to foster awareness, respect, and inclusion. Thank you.
Thank you, Leon. Welcome, everyone. Hope you had a great lunch, and we are excited to have Dr. Jack Groppel. For that little note, congratulations to my co-moderator here, Jessica. She has broken the streak. She's the first moderator this weekend to not have her name start with the letter K. We had Kalindi, we had Cam, I'm Kyle. Jessica, you're close. Jay's pretty close, so I'll give you partial credit for that. But let's get into it. No, you can sit. You can sit. I just, that's just my whole thing. Dr. Jack Groppel, you have done everything. You've climbed Mount Kilimanjaro. You witnessed Beatles procreate in your early college days. You opened up for Mary Tyler Moore. Your family bred award-winning beagles. If you don't know anything I'm talking about, definitely get the book Mountains Within. But let's get right into it. You and Dennis are certainly 2 very intelligent men. You had a passion, you had an education, and I know that you have quite the memory, and you could probably tell us the exact moment, day, and time where you met Dennis Vandermeer for the very first time. Would you like to share that with us?
Yeah, I can. I'll start with that, and then I'll give you a little context. We met right inside that front door up there on the 2nd floor. That was the first time Dennis and I spoke. And I don't know what year that was, but we had talked before that. But let me give you a little context. I was aware of the standard method of teaching in the 70s, but I'd never met Dennis. I was a doctoral student at Florida State University, and the gal that I was dating at the time knew a man by the name of Bill Peterson. Does anybody know that name? Yeah, Bill was running some classes, and the lady that I was dating, she knew Bill. I don't remember how they knew each other, but she said she knew that I was studying tennis. I'd been studying with high-speed cinematography for about 3 or 4 years now. And she said, well, why don't we go up and attend this class? And I said, I'd love to learn about this standard method because I've heard about it and I've read about it. I'd love to. So I actually attended a course with Bill Peterson. And he, as we were all together for that time period, we learned our background, and I learned more about Dennis and who Dennis was and how Dennis created the standard method and things. Then fast forward that I had the opportunity, the first pro that I ever worked with was Stan Smith. And how that came to be was that Stan had elbow problems, and he was having surgery with Dr. Robert Nerschel. And I just saw Stan this morning, and we reminisced a little bit about this. The weather was terrible the day that I flew to Hilton Head to shoot films, high-speed 16-millimeter films of Stan, and the weather was bad. And now remember, Dennis and I had never met, but we knew who each other was. So I called, and I talked to him. I said, can we use your covered courts? And I told him what it was, and he said, absolutely. I just want you to understand the gracious spirit that Dennis was. He said, absolutely, come over. Court 1's reserved for you. So Dennis, am I still good? Dennis wasn't on the property though. He wasn't there that day. I didn't get to meet him. So again, we keep knowing about each other, but we haven't met personally yet. So now I show up and we're on the second floor inside that door, and now I'm all excited because now I'm going to meet the man. And this is the guy. I mean, when you're my age, you're in your late 20s and early 30s, and you're studying tennis vehemently. I mean, I'm just a sponge trying to understand everything I can about the biomechanics and the physiology of tennis and training, and just really absorbing everything. So now I'm going to meet this man who's going to talk to me all about tennis. And he's going to ask me the hardest questions in the world. And right inside that door, you ready for the first question I ever got from Dennis Vandermeer? He goes up and he says, "Jack, can you shoot a cannon out of a canoe?" And I went, "What? What?" He says, "Can you shoot a cannon out of a canoe?" And I said, "Yeah, but not well." He said, "Well, tell me about it." I said, "Really, we're going to have this conversation? I want to talk about forehands and backhands. No, I want to know, can I shoot a cannon out of a canoe?" And what he wanted to do, he was really testing me. He was testing me as I look back on this. He wanted to talk about base of support of the canoe in the water. He wanted me to talk about impulse and what happens when the ignition went off. And could the cannonball really leave the cannon before that impulse would reach the base of support and destroy the canoe? He wanted me to talk about all these things, but it was a test. That was my first exam with Dennis. Can you shoot a cannon out of a canoe? And so we had a great conversation. And then it was a little late. Now remember, he's worked with Gideon Ariel, and he's got Stan Plagenhoff, and I was very honored one year to receive the Stan Plagenhoff Award for scientists in tennis. And Stan, so Dennis had his stable of really, really high quality people. But one day then he pulls out a racket. He puts it on the floor, and he puts his foot on the racket, on the handle of the racket. And he takes the ball, holds it shoulder length, and he bounces it against the ground. He says, "You see how it bounces?" You know how fast he talked. "You see how high that bounced?" I said, "Yeah." Then he's got the racket. He dropped it on the string bed, and it bounces like 70% higher. And he said, "Now watch this." He said, "That was in the center of the racket face. I'm going to drop it toward the tip. And it still bounces much higher than against the concrete floor. Now watch this." And then he bounces it off center. And he says, "So grip firmness." I'm going, what do you mean? You just made the racket part of the earth. He says, "No, but tell me about grip firmness." And we were able to have a great conversation about the fact that, because I'd done a lot of research on this, that if the ball hits in the center of the racket face, a firm grip really isn't required because of the harmonics of the racket. If it hits in the sweet spot. But how many contacts happen there, everybody? Like 0. Almost every contact point is a little bit off center. So now the grip plays a huge role in controlling the racket face because the impulse would move if the racket. So Dennis and I were able to have those kinds of conversations, and that was Dennis. I mean, and it was ironic. I've heard so many people say you knew when you were into the fold. You know, when I was into the fold with Dennis, he changed my name like you did Gene's. I was Jackie. Does anybody have any idea who ever called me Jackie in my whole life? My aunts and grandma called me Jackie, but Dennis called me Jackie. Then later on, I actually graduated to become Jack again. But for a while, I was Jackie. And he would ask me questions. So that's kind of the intro.
Thank you. What an intro. So, Dr. Groppel, you open your book with the quote, "Life's a journey is not to arrive at the grave, but rather to skid in sideways." Totally worn out, shouting, "Whoa, what a ride." Wow. I love that.
Thank you.
How has that belief guided the way you have built your life and career? And specifically, was your work with Dennis Vandermeer part of what helped shape that approach to performance and purpose?
Oh, yeah. I think, that quote opens the book because I've always been, I've never been an extreme risk taker. I would never just throw caution to the wind, but I was always a risk taker. I was always a moderate risk taker. And I think that's what I want to get across by that opening quote in my book, that you shouldn't be sitting on the sidelines. And I mean, if there's, I'm going to close this today with what my challenge to all of us is to continue Dennis's legacy, to be curious. Don't sit on the sidelines and just assume that everything's going to take care of itself. Be curious, be creative. And I think that literally is what I mean by opening with that quote, that you shouldn't be sitting on the sidelines. You should be worn out when you're at the end of your life and God calls you home. You should be worn out and thoroughly used up and ready to go. That's, I think, how we should live our lives.
Thank you, Dr. Groppel. Dennis was known for challenging people that he respected. He certainly challenged you a lot, and he certainly respected you a lot. Can you share a moment where he pushed back vehemently on something that you were completely convinced about, and how did that shape your role with performance in tennis?
Well, I think Dennis always asked questions. I mean, to Dennis's credit, and one of the things that amazed me about Dennis was, I was traveling all over the world, and I was in tennis clinics after tennis clinics. I was attending conferences after conferences. And if Dennis was at a conference, he was at every session. He wasn't sitting on the sidelines. He was a sponge. You've heard it incessantly. Everybody here, that when Dennis was in a meeting, he would be taking notes. He would be following what people are saying. And that didn't mean he agreed with it, but he would take notes. And so when we start talking about a thing, and Dennis wanted to see my films, because I was making some claims about the unit turn, and Doug and I were just talking about that. I mean, how the body is a linked system, and that was a big pushback that Dennis wanted to really understand, the linked system and how it would play a role. And Ben Kibler was working with Dennis a lot, and from that work in the linked system came up with the idea of the kinetic chain and how the body parts add upon themselves. So we constantly pushed on all those different issues to keep exponentially adding to each body of knowledge, which is what I believe really good research is. Really good research doesn't answer questions. Really great research asks better questions. See, and I think that's Dennis, at the end of the day, Dennis was a theoretician. Dennis wasn't a scientist, but he was a theoretician. He understood how to ask questions, and he was really good at it. And so he would bore deep. If he didn't believe that you understood his question, he would ask it a different way. So that happened all the time.
So then let me ask you this. When Dennis did challenge you, what do you think he was protecting or advocating in the game?
Well, Dennis wanted to just make sure that what he was doing was the right thing to be doing. Willing to make a change, I think, but he wanted to make sure that, the standard method was really the way to teach. If somebody enters the court, is that the fastest way? And we had conversations about that all the time. By the way, I did believe it, that it was the way he developed it was the fastest way for somebody to pick up skills on a tennis court. I really do believe that, and I'll stand by that. But we pushed it. We wanted to understand it. We wanted to ask why, not just accept it. And Dennis was willing to pressure test everything.
Okay. You and Dennis were both super strong personalities with big visions. When you think back about those spiritual exchanges and conversations with Dennis, do you see them as technical discussions about tennis and performance? Or were there really conversations about something much deeper, like purpose and human potential?
Wow. How much time do we have on that one?
As much as you want.
Okay. So yeah, the question might be about technique, and it might be about the unit turn and how to begin whatever the athlete is working on or the student is working on. It might begin with that, but it very quickly got to why. Dennis was not afraid to ask why. And I think sometimes we don't ask why. If you're, again, coming back to the whole science thing, if you want to understand the world, understand physics, understand mathematics, because that's really the world. And Dennis, as I said, was a theoretician. So he would ask questions, and then he would say, why is that true? Okay, that's a hard question to answer, everybody. See, it's one thing to take high-speed film and understand what is happening. Now understand why it's happening. Because is the athlete or the individual, maybe they don't have the strength to fire that foot out and have the unit turn. Maybe there's something going on. And Dennis was always willing, and I loved that about him, to not just accept it, but to ask why. Because, and I don't think we ask why enough, because we sort of accept things, and especially in a social media world where we have likes and there's so many tennis, videos out there and getting likes and says, I can improve you in 2 weeks, I can put you on the tour and everything else. We're not asking why enough. Why?
So the Instagram coaches that say they can make you a pro tour player in 2 weeks is not true? Okay, just
Next question.
okay. Just making sure, because they do get a lot of likes. So, Dennis, obviously we talk about his questioning. He lived in constant curiosity. What questions has he asked you that have stayed with you long after that conversation?
Other than, can you shoot a cannon out of a canoe?
Yes.
I've never forgotten that moment. It's the first moment I met the man. And think about why he asked me that question. I told you he was testing me, but everything was, for me, because of what I represented, the science of the game and understanding science, whether it was movement training, whether it was fitness training and strength development. And I mean, one of the first people I talked to, by the way, in the late 80s, I happened to be at an ITF Worldwide Coaches Conference in Germany. And we were there in the fall. And I'm trying to think, there were some Austrian alpine ski coaches there in the facility. They weren't at our conference, but we were there with the ITF. And we just started talking to them, and their athletes were starting to show up. And I just, out of the blue, asked this question. And I talked to Dennis about this question. I remember the conversation. I asked the Austrian alpine ski coaches what their athletes had been doing in the off season. Ready for this? Oh, they all play tennis. And I'm going, wait, what? They all play tennis? And the coaches are going, yeah. And all of a sudden I'm going, well, wait a minute. If alpine skiing is using tennis as a cross-training event, what could tennis be doing in cross-training? What could tennis players be doing to relieve the body from the stress, the constant stress of tennis, and be training in other ways? And I had conversations with Dennis about that, about what could athletes do in our sport in their off season or when they have an off week that would improve. And, again, in the perpetual motion of, the big names in coaching at the time, Braden and Vandermeer and everybody, Burwash, Jim Lair. I mean, you start talking about cross-training, and periodization became a big deal. The idea of peaking at certain times of the year. And so, yeah, I talked to Dennis about that stuff. And I mean, it was amazing to get his input as the man who's the teacher of teachers and really understood the depth of the game. Started talking about cross-training, movement. How can we improve movement on a tennis court, maybe not using tennis-specific things? And that became pretty cool stuff to talk about.
So then let's go ahead and talk about it. If Dennis were here today, I'm sure he probably is somewhere. If Dennis were here today and he was looking at the current state of performance science in tennis, what do you think he would challenge us on now?
Really?
Really?
I think Dennis
We
would
can
have
go
the
there.
same question that I have. Who's doing the science? Who's doing it? And where is it? And why aren't we understanding what's new? Because there's a whole lot of stuff that's out there. There's a whole lot of, I know there's people doing the research, but, and again, I'm not trying to, but when I was the chair of the Sports Science Committee for the USTA in the late 80s, throughout the 90s, and early 2000s, did it for 16 years, we were churning out material. We had constant, it was all about to-dos. Who's doing this? Who's doing this? And I don't want to throw anybody under the bus. I don't want to create anything, but I think Dennis would say, why aren't we still churning out material? Why aren't we doing more? Why aren't we writing more about how the brain works? Why aren't we writing more about how artificial intelligence could help coaching? I think Dennis would ask a lot of those questions. Why aren't we doing more if we have so much talent in the academic world? Why aren't we doing more to help coaching education? That's my take.
So I never personally had the opportunity to meet Dennis, but recently I lost one of my greatest mentors and board members. She recently passed away, and I learned that when she came to Dennis, he allowed her to stay an extra week at no cost. And that small impact changed her life. And Dr. Groppel, when you think about your spirited conversations with Dennis, how did he balance demanding excellence while still investing in people?
Dennis had incredible compassion. I mean, any of us that had the great fortune to spend time with him, he would definitely push you, but he would push you with compassion and grace. And I think that's an attribute that not a lot of people have. Most people either push or they're very compassionate, but it's hard to push and be compassionate. And Dennis was just incredible. I mean, you heard what he had Jean do, her first J. I mean, I challenge almost anybody to have the job description that Jean Mills had when Dennis hired her. But yet at the same time, you know, he's supporting Jean 100%. You knew that in his heart. He wants to support Jean in everything she wants to do in her career. And I think that's a very typical way of looking at Dennis. He would push, but with a lot of compassion. And that's something we could all strive for as well, to have that kind of push, but also that kind of compassion and love.
Speaking of compassion and love, having read your book twice already, working on a third time, I understand the relationship with your father was adversarial at times. And he definitely challenged you and pushed you to kind of becoming more than maybe what you wanted to be at the time, but obviously looking back, perhaps a bit thankful. Do you see any similarities between the relationship with your father and the relationship with Dennis and how he pushed you and how tough he was?
That's interesting. Well, first you should understand why, you know, the book that I wrote is, it is my life story, and it is very vulnerable. And 10 years ago, I wouldn't have written this book, and I'm not here to sell this book. I'm hoping that the book helps people, because I was very, very driven, incredibly driven, but at what cost? My father was a very demanding human being, and I won't go into a whole lot of detail, but there was he definitely believed in spare the rod, spoil the child. And after one particular beating when I was 6 years old, instead of cowering, I said, I'll prove to you, I'll show you what I can do. And for whatever reason, that was the motivating factor for me in my entire life. I look back on my life, and I was just really a young man who wanted to get love from his father. But I was so driven. And then when I had mentors come into my life like Chuck Dillman and people like Dennis Vandermeer, I mean, even though he pushed me, Dennis saw something in me, a spark that he encouraged me. But Chuck Dillman said 17 words to me when I was you made fun of the Beatles. I mean, when I was 20, I went to grad school. Sorry, I need to back up. I told my father I'm going to play tennis at University of Illinois in the Big Ten. He thought I was absolutely nuts, because you see, I never had a tennis lesson. I taught myself to play, and I was going to walk on, and I was going to play for a Big Ten school. And my dad said, if you're going to do this, I think you're crazy. You're not going to make the team, but you got to study agriculture, because I'm going to pay for this education. So I go to Illinois, surprised him. I made the team, but I get a degree in agriculture in wildlife biology. That's my undergraduate degree. I can take you bird watching, and we can have a lot of fun. We would have a blast bird watching, everybody. Get some binoculars, and we would have a blast. I could start talking to you about all the different reptiles that we'd find on the shore. And so I couldn't get a job. I was offered one job, and that was, part of it was shoveling pig manure. And I said, no, I'd rather not. So what do? I go back to grad school. I started grad school in population genetics. Now in my brain, I'm going to study migratory habits of wildlife. Now remember, I'm 22 years old. But now this is to Kyle's introduction on the beetles. At 22 years of age, what you do when you're a research assistant in population genetics, you have to be working with breeds of animals that breed very quickly. So you've got to study generations of progeny. So my role, 3 to 4 days a week, I had to go to a laboratory and change the flower in test tubes. So a little beetle called Tribolium beetle, flower beetle, so they could breed more rapidly. So here I am at 22, creating a romantic environment for beetles to have sex. And I'm crying myself to sleep at night. And I'm a mess. Now remember, I'm 22. That's why, if anything, I want my book to give people hope. I'm 22. I'm lost. I played tennis for the University of Illinois, but I'm lost. And my sister, bless her heart to this day, said to me, what do you care about? And all I cared about at 22 was playing tennis. I said, I want to play tennis again, but I can't. I've used up all my eligibility. I can't play. Well, why don't you go talk to the people in physical education? Dad hates that. I said, Dad will kill me. She goes, who cares? You're 22. You don't know what you don't know. So I made an appointment. And the head of the Department of Physical Education said he would meet with me. And I met with him, and I poured my heart out to him. I just word vomited everything about how bad life was. It was just awful. My father, it's awful. And he goes, well, your grades are pretty good. He says, why don't I admit you to the Masters of Science program in physical education? I'm going right away. And by the way, no offense to anyone with the job that someone has. This is just where my 22-year-old brain was. I said, because I'm thinking about my dad. And I'm going, do I have to be a PE teacher then? And he goes, no. There's all kinds of roles. You could coach, you could do research, you could be a consultant, you might get involved in management, maybe you'll go into business. And I'm going, okay, this sounds kind of cool. Then he says, well, if I admit you, you're willing to sign on? I said, I don't know how I'm going to pay for it. And he literally looked at me and he said, did you say you played tennis here at the University of Illinois? I said, I did. He goes, I need somebody to teach my activity classes. If I waive your tuition and fees and give you a small stipend, will you teach tennis for me? And I said, thank you, Jesus. I said, yes, I will. Yes, I will. And I walked out of that room, and I knew Dad was going to cut me off that night. And I called him, and he said, you realize I'm not paying for this? I said, Dad, I got it covered. And he goes, well, how'd that happen? I said, don't worry, Dad, I got it covered. And then they made me take cadaver anatomy. That was unnerving, the first time I see a human cadaver, because we're going to dissect it. Exercise physiology and kinesiology. I fell in love with it. I got straight A's. And at the end of that first semester, Dr. Charles Dillman, who became a huge mentor to me, said 17 words to me. He said, if you apply yourself, you could become a pioneering leader in the science of tennis performance. And that's all it took. There was no career. There was nothing. There was no template. I just said, I'm going to do this. I don't know how. I don't know what it's going to take. So I got my master's degree, and I went to Florida State for my PhD, and I studied under a man who Dr. Dillman had worked with at Penn State, but he didn't have doctoral directive status. And in God's ultimate timing, the director of my dissertation was Dr. Robert Singer, who was the president of the International Society of Sports Psychology. So now I have one of the world leaders in sports psychology directing my dissertation, and I'm studying. So my doctoral dissertation was a three-dimensional analysis of the one-handed and two-handed backhand of highly skilled players. And I was the first one to really ever do 3 dimensions. I had a high-speed camera from the side and one from the top. So from the side, you get X and Y, and you get X and Y up here, but one of the coordinates is the Z-axis as you're looking here. So I'm able to get 3 dimensions, and I'm able to look at the one-handed and two-handed backhand in 3 dimensions. So again, coming back to this whole mentoring thing and parental thing, Bob Singer became a mentor. And then Vic Braden took me under his wing. And then Dennis pushed me and started asking me all kinds of questions. And whether Dennis meant to or not, he played a huge role in guiding me. But it was all this that happened in my career, and I've had such a blessing of a career. I know I have, and I look back on it fondly and with grace and thanksgiving, but I would never be in the position that I am right now professionally without people like Dennis Vandermeer.
That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing. So as we see, when two pioneers challenge each other, the sport advances. So what do you feel tennis gained because of you and Dennis and how you pushed each other?
If I played a role, and I think Dennis would answer the same thing, if I played a role, I think we all would say, if I played a role, I think it would be to help people understand and to help people, you get back to the philosophy, to help people really understand the joy. We teach a sport. We teach people how to play a sport. But yet at the same time, we also know that it's the healthiest sport and healthiest activity that someone can possibly play. I mean, I wrote in 1997, I wrote the 34 reasons to play tennis, and I still stand by those to this day. But we're more than just tennis teachers. A coach and a teacher is more than just forehands and backhands. We teach life skills to everybody. We touch a life every hour of every day. And I can't tell you enough how important that is in our world, especially today, where it's a social media world where we don't have contact. We have contact with people, and we have an opportunity to influence someone's life every day we go to work. And I think that's how Dennis would answer that too. I think.
What would be that one thing that you would tell my generation?
Ooh. Understand who you are. Understand your identity. I think a lot of people in your generation struggle with their identity, and I think social media has helped that. Understand who you are. Once you understand who you are, and by the way, this might be the role of a mentor to help you understand who you are, then live your life to fulfill that destiny of who you are, knowing that it's going to change throughout your life. So someone in your generation who is young and single and they're still in school, or they've got a role, but you just got married, I think I heard.
Just 6 months ago.
Okay, so your mission changes. And then if you decide to start a family, your mission changes again. When you're older and you have grandchildren, your mission changes again. Mine, who knew that I was going to go to China by myself and adopt a 4-year-old who hated my guts? He didn't like me. He couldn't speak English. I couldn't speak Mandarin. But in this whole infinite wisdom of lives touched, understand your identity and who you are. And when I met my son, I'll never forget. If my son were here right now, he's 21 now, he would tell, if you asked him, what's the most important thing your dad ever taught you? You know what my son would say? We talk about this often. I hope I don't cry. Within 2 or 3 days of meeting, you know what I taught him? Couldn't understand a word. I taught him how to shake hands, look somebody in the eye, and say, "Hi, how are you?" He would tell you that's the most important thing I ever taught him. And that guy, like you can imagine in today's world, he has a great handshake, and he greets people like that to this day. And we talk about the simplicity of "how are you," that sometimes maybe it's misunderstood. So that's why I taught him eye contact. Make sure the grip is firm. The one thing in tennis is the dead fish handshake. We've all had those, haven't we? You finish a match and somebody's like this at the net. I actually would, if that happened to me when I was playing, I would grab their hand and make them shake my hand. Even if I lost, I would make them shake my hand. Probably thought a lot about me at that point, but anyway. But I hope that's helpful.
So you brought up your son. We didn't, but since you brought him up, let's talk about what else your son has helped you do. I know we could be here a lot longer, but obviously climbing the highest peak on the continent of Africa. That's something that is quite impressive at any age, let alone for the Ironman. So go ahead, Jack. Talk to us about climbing Mount Kilimanjaro. Why? How?
Okay.
How did that come about?
So bear with me. I'll try. I'm a storyteller. You all know that. I'm a storyteller. So when I was 20 years old, I told you about the estranged relationship I had with my dad. And I was playing tennis for the University of Illinois. It was the summer before my senior year. And my dad calls me. I'll never forget. It was like in March. He says, tell the coach that you're not going to play many tournaments this summer. I'm going, why would I do that? Because I don't like being at home. But my dad's just a fearmonger. I don't want to be around the house. I want to be gone. And he says, well, you and I are going to drive to Alaska. And I'm going, you're not serious. I'm going, how long is this going to take? He says, I think we can do it in 6 weeks. And I said, Dad, how many miles are we going to drive? He says, I think around 4,000. I'm going, Dad, we will kill each other. There will be homicide. He goes, I'm not so sure. We need to do it. So we did it. We drove to Alaska. Now, we struggled. At one point, I almost drove him off a cliff. We're on the edge of a mountain road, and he's railing on me, and I knew he had a fear of heights. I just drove to the edge of the road, and he starts screaming at me, Jack, pull over. I said, shut up. No, pull over. I said, if you shut up, I'll pull over. You got to stop before I pull over. And he did. And that trip to Alaska, even though it wasn't healing at that point, that was the beginning of my dad and I reconciling. And we did reconcile. The last 10 years of his life were very positive. So, but that was the beginning. So now I adopt my son. And I'm an older father, obviously. I'm in my 60s at the time. And my wife, his mom and I had gotten divorced. That's another story. More of those. We're not going there, though.
And you look at the time.
Yeah, it hit me that I wanted to do an adventure with my son. He was 11 years old at the time, and I said, I want to do an adventure with him. And you guys know me pretty well. I'm go big or go home kind of a guy. So I start doing research, and I come to find that Mount Kilimanjaro is the highest mountain in the world that you can actually hike. You don't need technical gear. You can actually hike. It's 19,341 feet high, but you can hike it. You can trek it. And I said, I just kept studying it. And then I called his mom, and obviously we're divorced. And I said, here's what I want to do with Shen. Shen is our son. And she said, and I assured her that I would do, because I was working for Johnson & Johnson at the time, and we were able to make sure, like, if something happened to me on the mountain, we could get him back to her and everything else. So I'm doing all this due diligence. And she, after about a half hour, she says, all right. She says, I don't know, but okay. And we hang up, and I call her back. And is this being recorded? I don't what I'm going to say right now. All right, just delete this part. I called her. I said, do you mind not telling anybody? Because I haven't really talked to Shen. And she goes, what do you think I'm going to do? I'm going to call all my friends and say what that freaking idiot wants to do now. Not saying freaking. What that freaking idiot wants to do now. Like, I want to go climb Mount Kilimanjaro with our 12-year, he'll be 12. So I take him to Rocky Mountain National Park. Shen was a cleft palate child. I didn't know how he'd handle the altitude. We hiked at 12, 14,000. He seemed to do okay. And I said, do you want to go a mile higher? He goes, in the United States? I said, and he's 11. I said, no, we're going to go to Africa. He goes, okay, let's go. So we train and train and train. We get to Africa. He's 12 years old. I'm 65. Artificial knees. We get on the mountain. And right away, I'm the oldest on the mountain, and he's the youngest. And my nickname, because I'm the oldest on the mountain, my nickname in Swahili was Babu, which means grandpa. And I'm going, you guys got to be kidding me. Really, I trained so hard for this, and this is my son. But they were very respectful. They'd go around me, the porters and the guides, pole, pole, Babu, which means go slowly, grandpa, you know. And anyway, day 3, they come to find, the head guide comes up to me and says, is it true what they say about your knees? And I said, what do you mean? He said, we hear you have metal knees. I said, it's true. They're artificial knees. They're metal. He says, then we change your name. I said, all right. And I'm sarcastically, what is it now? And he goes, we call you Chumamatu. And I said, what's that mean? He goes, Iron Man. And I went, boom. I'm good with that one. So my son, now to come back to him, what I've learned from him, every night, my son, 12 years old, nobody was even close to his age on the mountain. There were 3 other 12-year-olds on the mountain. None of them made it to the summit. But every night, he could have gone back to the tent and read and played games he'd stored on his phone. Instead, he played cards with everybody, all the older people. Everybody, the youngest was like 30, between 30s and 55. He's playing cards with everybody, and nobody can beat him because he and I played cards all the time. Nobody can beat him. King's corners, hearts, poker, because his nickname then, because nobody could beat him, became the big dog. Everybody called him the big dog, my 12-year-old son. Now we get on summit night. At summit night, you climb from 13,500 feet to 19,341. You're going to climb 4,000 vertical feet overnight. And they do that because if you get injured or you get sick, they've got all day to get you back down. If you go up during the day, they're afraid they can't get you down at night. So you climb during the night. It's the longest night of your life. And they warn you about that it's going to be hard. And they tell you to think about what matters most. And we get back to the tent, and they tell us to rest. And we get back, and here I am with my 12-year-old son. I'm just checking. I was like, buddy, how you feeling? He says, I think you're crazy for bringing me here. But then we climb. We start climbing all night long, daylight. Now we're like 400 meters from the summit, not the summit, from the cone. And we're seeing people, our fellow climbers on the cone. But our heads are down. Your head is down. You just chuck your poles. You take a step. All of a sudden, I heard all this noise around us, and I looked up, and the Rangers were skiing down the scree with sick climbers. They were throwing up. They had mountain sickness, altitude sickness, and I got scared. And I turned around to Shen. I said, Shen, are you okay? And my son, my 12-year-old son, had his head down, didn't answer me. And I said, buddy, you got to answer me. This is serious. Are you okay? And this is my 12-year-old son. He can't talk, and he can't take a step. And the guide that was with us heard me get firm with him and came back and said, Shen, do you want to go back? This is the lesson. He said, do you want to go back? And I'm going, we're done. Because I'm going, he just opened up that door that it was okay to go back. And this is my 12-year-old son. Do you want to go back? They can't talk. And all of a sudden, remember he'd been playing cards with everybody every night? All of our fellow climbers were on the cone, and they saw him stuck. And they all started screaming and cheering for my son. And I'm a mess. I start weeping, and I'm going, buddy, what do you want to do? And he said, and I got closer to him, and he held his hand up and says, Dad, I got this. We're gonna do this. This is my 12-year-old son. I got this, Dad. And he made it to the summit of Kilimanjaro. And I believe it's because of all that.
I apologize to everyone. I did not bring tissues. Having gone through the book, you've written about everything up until this point. So I guess my question for the man that's done just about everything, what's next?
What's next? I think, being able to be here with all of you is what's next. I think what's next is for all of us to answer. I mean, I think if you really want to honor somebody like Dennis, is this our closing remark? Okay. If we really want to honor someone like Dennis and Pat, live like they did. Be curious. Don't accept the status quo. Don't accept the world as it is right now. Be curious. Ask questions. Help people. Be a mentor. Everybody here, we're further along in life than a lot of people in the game. Be a mentor to someone. If you're not being a mentor right now, please help someone. And if you know younger people and they need to be mentored, but I think we need, I just think we all need to be mentors at this stage in our lives. I mentor probably a dozen people right now, all in their 40s, every one of them. And it all just happened. I wasn't trying to. We just became friends. And it's not like this father-son or father-daughter relationship. It's just friends. And I'm an older friend who's been down the path already, and I'm just mentoring them, and I'm just giving them hope. Because we live in a world that doesn't give hope very well. Hope has to come from each and every one of us. And that, I think, is what Dennis and Pat were all about. They gave all of us hope.
Well said. Thank you, Dr. Groppel. We have a few moments left, and I know that you said you're not here to sell books, but I would be remiss if I didn't give you the chance to at least speak about it, what made it come about, and what you're looking for people to get out of it that do read it.
Well, thank you. And I'm not here to sell the book. I'm really not. I wrote the book because, first of all, I wasn't going to. I had a lot of people tell me because I'd had such a unique career between speaking. I've had several different careers. If you look at tennis, if you look at business, speaking, and so on. A lot of people had been telling me that I should write my memoir, and I really wasn't going to. I didn't want to sound so egotistical. And when I was on Kilimanjaro, I realized that the mountain was just like my life. It was exhilarating, yet terrible. I was full of terror. At one point on the mountain, it was muddy and foggy, and the guide says, put your foot on this 2-inch ledge and swing around. And I'm going, that doesn't sound really safe. He says, I'll catch you. I said, you better freaking catch me, because it's about 150 feet straight down. And I went, this is just like my life's been. Exhilarating, yet anxiety. You know, I struggled with relationships. I've owned that to all of you. And that's why I think, you know, I hit rock bottom in 96. Those of you that knew me then, I was hospitalized for 15 days. I only had one person outside my family come to visit me. And that got me on a path to reconnecting to my faith, and then going to China by myself to adopt a 4-year-old. So the book, yes, it has all of my accomplishments. If you read it only for that, I will tell you, you're going to think I'm an egomaniac. But if you read it for what's in between, the marriages, me going, I'm like a farm boy. I was a farm boy. And I'm going, do you believe this? It was almost like that's how I wanted to present it. And it's about the transformation. And at the end, I talk about having hope and having mentors in your life. So it is definitely a memoir. It is not a self-help book. It is not a clinical psychology book. It is a story about one person's journey through life who was able to transform his life. That's the story of the book. But don't get it for what it's not. I guess that's what I'm after. Don't get it because it's a psychology book or a self-help book that Jack Groppel wrote. Get it because you're interested in understanding a person's journey through life.
Thank you, Dr. Groppel, for your time and for your sharing your journey and for sharing about your faith.
Thank you. Thank you. How great did they do? Didn't they do a wonderful job?
Thank you, my friend. It's an honor to call you a friend. So
Agreed. Thank you very much.
thank you so much.
Blessings to
Thank
all
you,
of you.
everyone.
Blessings. Take care.